Okay, so I'm coming into the create method of my controller, and I've added a little bit of logic here that after attempting to save the movie with the parameters the user just supplied, if the save returns a truthy value, meaning it was successful, I'm going to do a redirect. And remember that movies path is one of the route helpers that got set up for us by the resourceful routes. Movies path in particular will expand to the appropriate URI path for the list of all movies. And there's a second argument to redirect, which is there anything to put in the flash? And in this case, there is something to put in the flash. We're going to populate flash notice with the helpful message that the movie was successfully created. Remember that by convention, notice is used for informational messages where everything is generally okay. Warning would be used for messages where something might have gone wrong. And I have parenthesized defensively, but remember that in Rails, if you can omit punctuation without making the syntax ambiguous, it's legal to do so. And this is what you'll usually see in a typical app. So we populated the flash here, but we also need to make sure that the flash is visible. I mentioned that since it's such a common pattern for a redirect to populate the flash and then have the flash displayed on the very next action, because that's so common, it makes sense to actually dry out the code that would do that and put it in one place. And if you remember, the application layout file is what wraps every one of the views. So we're going to go ahead and put it there. Here's the application layout file, and I have added a little bit of code to the place right before the actual view would be rendered. What I've put here is basically looking at whether Flash Notice has anything in it, and if so, just display that thing. And remember that this layout wraps every one of the views, so even though in this case I'm redirecting to the list of all movies or the index view, the mechanism for displaying the contents of the Flash, if there are any, is going to be available no matter where I would have redirected. So let's see what happens when we actually run the app. We will start the server as usual, and we will visit the list of all movies. I will create a new one, and I will give it a rating. And now I find myself back at the list of movies view, and you can see that the URL matches that fact. And I've got this little helpful message that the movie was successfully created. So our flow worked the way we expected. This was the happy path. And why do we have to do this? I mean, this seems like a departure from the sort of pure RESTful view of route goes to controller, goes to the same named view, and we're all done. And it's kind of for the same reason that in an interactive web app, creating or updating each require two interactions. It's because there's a human being on the other end of that connection. If we were making a request to our app via an API, there would really be no reason for doing this redirect hack, because if the creation succeeded, the caller would just get back a data structure with that information. If the creation failed, the return value would indicate that there was a failure. So there's no reason to have to redirect anywhere in a programmatic API scenario, but when we're dealing with a human being using a web browser, things are different. So this is a concession that sort of pure RESTfulness makes so that the app can be made interactive with kind of a minimal disruption to the REST way of thinking about things. What about the sad path? The path in which the creation of the movie, for whatever reason, didn't work. For example, we might have set a limit on how long the name can be, and maybe the user exceeded that limit, or maybe they left something blank and they're not supposed to leave it blank. So in this case, what I've asked Rails to do is simply render a different view than the one the controller action names. So we're in the create controller action, but in this scenario, rather than looking for a view called create, which doesn't exist anyway, I'm telling Rails to render the view that corresponds to the new action. Why am I doing it this way? Well, for one thing, it kind of makes sense that if the creation of the movie failed, the user might want to try again. But the real question is, why didn't I say redirect to new movie path? Because you would think, by the logic of the previous path, instead of redirecting to the index, I could just redirect to the same form the user filled in to create a movie in the first place. And wouldn't that let them try again? But again, remember that redirect causes an entire new HTTP request cycle, which means that other than things that you put in the session or the flash, everything gets blown away. And in particular, we've already collected the stuff that the user typed in. We've already created an in-memory Ruby object that has those attribute values. it would be nice if we allowed the user to essentially pick up where they left off so that when they are ready to try again, they'll still be creating a new movie, but the form can begin by populating the fields with the values the user has already typed in. And so if we say render, essentially all of the state that we've set up, like these instance variables, will be available to the new movie template. And so the form will appear not empty, but with some values already in place. If we did a redirect, it would still work in the sense that the user would find themselves at the create new movie form again, but the form would be completely blank and they wouldn't get to use their original values. So again, this is a departure from the pure REST scenario, because in that scenario, there really is no notion of a redirect or a render. Here, we're doing this concession to make the human being's life a little bit easier. Now that we've seen how a redirect can be used to terminate an action in a different way, because before we had terminated every action by rendering a view, and redirect gives us a different thing that we can do, there's one other good use for redirect that we can illustrate, and it has to do with the application's root route. Remember, so far, if we just went to what we'll call the home page of the app, in other words, we provided no path as part of the URL, the root route is just the / route. You can think of it as the app's homepage. And right now, when we do that, we see that silly little landing page that says, yay, your app is on Rails. Arguably, the homepage of the app should actually do something useful. So Rails gives us a way to explicitly map the root route of the application and what we want it to do. So we're going to choose to have the app's homepage essentially be the list of all movies. It's as good a choice as any. And we can tell Rails to do this by adding to the routes file something like root to movies index. And again, remembering that parentheses and braces are often optional if they're not ambiguous, you should look at this as root is a method call, and the method call takes exactly one argument, which is a hash. The hash is expected to have a key called to, whose value is the controller and action that should serve as the application's homepage. So it's the same syntax used for all of the other routes. That's one thing we could do. Another thing we could do, though, using our new friend, the redirect, is we could say that the root route should redirect to /movies, which is, as you remember, the list of all movies. The effects of this look like they're the same, and they're actually very similar, but they're not identical. So let's take a look at what the difference is and why it matters. So if I go back into my app, and I look at the routes file, right now the only thing in there is resources movies. That gives us our basic set of RESTful routes. So I'm going to say route the root to and now if I try to visit the root route, sure enough, I'm at the list of movies, so the app's homepage now does something useful. But let's compare this with the alternative to say redirect to this different URI. I open a second window here, and I will visit the root route again. And sure enough, I'm on the same index page, but notice the difference in the URIs. When I use redirect, an entire new HTTP request cycle began with the movies list URI as the official URI. So not only am I on the correct page, but the URI route that was used to get there matches up with the existing movies path. Whereas when I just said map the root route to the list of movies action, but don't use a redirect, now I have this kind of interesting situation where the thing that I'm actually seeing, the view that I'm actually seeing, and the RESTful action that was executed doesn't exactly match the URI. So this is a departure from pure RESTfulness. You could say that it's an acceptable departure. I mean, it's no worse than the sort of redirect hack we just saw, but this one, in my opinion, is unnecessary. Because if you use the redirect, it doesn't really add significant time to the request, but you end up with a request whose RESTful URI matches the RESTful action that the user sees happening in the browser. So you can do it either way, but I think doing it with a redirect is cleaner, and it's also drier because you're basically saying, I already have a working route for /movies. I just want to redirect there. I will reuse the exact same route, controller, and action, and I'll basically just tell the user, this is where you meant to go. So that's a Rails idiomatic way to add a root route. That means that we have now added basic CRUD actions We have shown how to interact with forms. We have shown how to map the root action to something sensible. And we have shown how the controller actions interact with the database. We have basically touched every moving part of a simple Rails app, so congratulations.